I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for being here. We're going to get started this morning in Uvalde, Texas. Today, the Justice Department is expected to release the findings of its investigation into the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School.
Justice Department officials have said the review will focus on the law enforcement response to the shooting. In 2022, a panel of state lawmakers found that nearly 400 officers responded to the shooting, but then waited more than an hour to confront the gunman. In all, 19 students and 2 teachers were killed in the tragedy. For more, we're joined by NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley. Ryan, good morning. So what can you tell us about this report? Are we expected to learn anything new here?
So essentially this investigation in DOJ's eyes can sort of speak broadly to this issue and have an impact not only there, but hopefully they think on, nationwide. So essentially, if you look at other investigations at the Justice Department, that there are basically principles that you could take and learn lessons from to try to stop this from happening in the future. You've seen it in Ferguson, you've seen that in Baltimore. Now, those investigations were focused more broadly on police practices, and this investigation is really kind of focused on just what happens in this individual sort of shooting circumstance, how they should have responded, what they could have done differently, and they're hoping that other law enforcement agencies will take heed to that and learn lessons from this report so that this sort of thing is prevented.
Ryan, let's talk through what could come of this. We've already seen several of the officers involved lose their jobs. That includes Uvalde's school police chief, Pete Arredondo. Could we see more firings or maybe even any kind of charges here?
I think, the focus of this is going to be sort of on the principles. This isn't a criminal investigation. This is not, something the Justice Department normally does all that often. This is something that is just more focused on sort of trying to prevent this from happening going forward. This is an investigation that, is essentially an investigation not run with a criminal, looking for criminal intent, but rather looking for implications and how this could be done differently in the future to see if there can be some lessons learned here to make sure that, other law enforcement agencies are more prepared for these circumstances going in, because we really, there have been some sort of standards set since the Columbine shooting, and there have been principles and ways you're supposed to approach this thing. And the main thing is obviously confronting the gunman as quickly as possible. So this is going to look at all the evidence that DOJ has gathered and give a report on what exactly went wrong and what lessons can be learned here so that other law enforcement agencies can take a different approach in the future.
So, Ryan, ahead of the report's release, we saw Attorney General Merrick Garland arriving in Uvalde yesterday. What should we know about his visit?
Yeah, so I think that the Attorney General, obviously, this is a very important investigation for him. Also, we saw Vanita Gupta is in town. She's the number 3 official at the Justice Department. And this is sort of one of the last things she'll be doing because she's actually planning on leaving the Justice Department, but has sort of taken charge and overseeing this investigation. She had also been in charge of the Ferguson investigation way back. So it's sort of the same type of probe where they're hoping that these other agencies can really look into this, and that this will have a broader impact beyond just this one community, and will end up helping other law enforcement agencies be better prepared for these sort of circumstances going forward.
All right, Ryan Riley. Ryan, thank you so much.
Now let's get to the bitter cold gripping the nation. So far this morning, tens of millions of Americans are again waking up under winter weather alerts.
So far, more than 30 deaths have been linked to the frigid weather over the past week. An ice storm slammed parts of the Pacific Northwest, bringing freezing rain and snow, creating whiteout conditions and causing road closures. In the South, drivers in central Alabama actually abandoned their vehicles to avoid icy conditions on the roads. A few hours away, Nashville, Tennessee saw more than 6 inches of snow this week, recorded its coldest weather in 3 decades. And in the Northeast, hard-hit Buffalo is preparing to deal with even more lake effect snow, and that's on top of the 3+ feet that some areas have already seen.
For more on these frigid temperatures, let's get a closer look at your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Angie Lastman joins us with the forecast. Angie, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. We've got more of the same coming your way in multiple spots across the country. The cold weather, the snow, the rain, the freezing rain, all on the table in some spots. Let's take a big picture look. You can notice we do have some snow across portions of the Great Lakes. That lake effect snow, it continues today. We're going to see more and more of that here as the days go on. And we've also got that next storm system impacting the west, a little bit of snow working through portions of the Rockies and eventually the Central Plains later today. When it comes to what we'll be dealing with, we've got got the winter storm or winter weather alerts, I should say, up for 64 million people. They stretch from the west all the way to the east, and we'll likely see these become more expansive as the next couple of days go on. We've got a couple things going on. We've got one system that's going to spread some of that snow into the center of the country, and then we've got another system that's going to kind of develop this area of low pressure that brings the potential for some wintry kind of mix. So we've got the freezing rain, the ice, the snow all on the table for portions of the south. As we get into the later parts of today, that snow spreads into parts of the Midwest, and we see these two kind of systems combined and then lift all of that snow into the mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, and the Great Lakes. That happens tomorrow. Early in the morning, I'd say in places like New York City, you'll see that commute be a little dicey. I think I-95 will be difficult to travel through the day tomorrow. So just plan a little extra time for yourself. And again, no surprise here, more of that lake effect snow happening. We don't have a whole lot of ice cover on the lakes. So this means that the lake effect snow machine, as we call it, continues. We also have the potential for some icy conditions out west. This is going to be really difficult for travel. Power outages will be likely. We saw a kind of round of this yesterday, and there's more to come. When it is all said and done here, as we get through Saturday, we'll see another couple of inches of snow for some of those major cities that we're super excited to see their first inch of snow in a while. We'll get maybe 1 to 3 inches. We're expected in places like New York, Philadelphia. The higher amounts are going to be, in the higher elevations and along the lake. You can see places like Buffalo, Erie could all pick up a substantial amount of snow between now and then. So this will be another snowy couple of days for folks there. But I think, places like New York, another delightful kind of snowfall where it doesn't interrupt too much, but it does come during the morning commute tomorrow and last through the afternoon commute.
We like a delightful snowfall.
Yeah. We had this drought, and now I just feel like it's snowing here.
Listen, if it has to snow, you might as well be happy about it.
Exactly.
Whether you're happy or not, it's still going to snow.
Right. That's a good point. I like that attitude. You should have a book of positive outlooks like that about the weather.
Put it on my 2024 plans.
Thanks, Angie.
Writer E. Jean Carroll is set to continue being cross-examined this morning in her defamation trial against former President Trump. It was an eventful day in court yesterday. Carroll took the stand saying her life was upended after the former president accused her of making up allegations that he sexually assaulted her at a Manhattan department store in the 90s. Trump has already been found liable for sexual abuse and defamation. He's appealing that verdict and has denied ever meeting Carroll.
During court yesterday, the judge issued a warning to Trump about his disruptive behavior during Carroll's testimony. This all comes as the former president has eyes on New Hampshire after a big win in Iowa earlier this week. NBC's Garrett Hake has the details.
The campaign sprint to the New Hampshire primary taking a detour through a New York City courtroom. Donald Trump there for a second defamation lawsuit by writer E. Jean Carroll. The judge threatening to kick out the Republican frontrunner for talking too loudly to his attorney. Trump saying, "I would love it." The judge replying, "I know you would because you just can't control yourself in this circumstance." On social media, Trump attacking the judge as, quote, a seething and hostile Clinton-appointed judge who is abusive, rude, and obviously not impartial.
I'm leaving right now for New Hampshire. We just got a poll in that shows me leading by a lot. And I think we'll do there maybe similar to what we did in Iowa.
It comes after Trump's rally in New Hampshire.
Nikki Haley is a disaster.
Looking for another landslide win and going after Nikki Haley. A new poll shows Haley in a distant second here, trailing Trump by 16 points.
She's not tough enough to deal with these people. I will tell you that. She's not tough enough.
Your time is Tuesday.
The Granite State widely seen as make or break for Haley, with its mix of more independent voters and moderate Republicans like Haley supporter Jude Blake.
Well, I think Trump doesn't believe in my version of democracy, and I'm just looking for an alternative. Plus, younger. We need younger, and we need women.
Haley campaigning.
I voted for President Trump twice, but rightly or wrongly, chaos follows him. You know I'm right. Chaos follows him.
I'm the only one that's not running a basement campaign.
While Ron DeSantis calling out both Trump and Haley for refusing to debate before the primary here.
Donald Trump won't debate. He's not willing to defend his record. And Nikki Haley won't debate because she's not willing to defend her record. What does that say?
But that's not swaying Trump supporter Bob Swan.
What put Trump over the top after you looked at everybody else?
The previous administration and
Just the fact that he has an actual record.
forceful and willing to fight against the establishment.
The former president will be off the campaign trail on Thursday to attend his mother-in-law's funeral in Florida. But the campaign is planning a series of large rallies this weekend, hoping to send a signal that this race is over if he can score another big win on Tuesday night.
All right, Garrett, thank you.
NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos joins us now for more on the defamation case against Trump. Danny, good to see you. So Trump himself not expected to be in court today. So what are you going to be looking out for? And as this sort of starts to come to a close, what are you thinking about that you've seen so far?
Yeah, this is a defamation case where only damages are at issue. So what we won't really see evidence of is whether or not what Trump said about E. Jean Carroll was true or false, whether or not, as Trump has said, I never met the woman. None of that should come in, although Donald Trump, you never know, may blurt it out, and then technically it's on the record. But we're going to continue to see the plaintiff build their damages case. We are going to see E. Jean Carroll subjected to cross-examination by Alina Habba, and she's given us a preview of her theory of cross-examination. It won't be so much just to minimize the damages that Carroll suffered, but instead she plans to go on the offensive, I believe, and it's going to be more along the lines of, wasn't this conduct by Trump something that made you more famous than you ever could have imagined? Haven't you benefited from this conduct by Donald Trump? And that would go to her damages. It's a fair area for cross-examination, but I expect E. Jean Carroll's going to be pretty well prepared for that and explain and deny that and say, look, no, it's really what I said yesterday, which is this devastated me and it ruined my life.
So is it still possible that Trump's team could call him to take the stand? And if that happened, could parameters be put in place for him testifying?
The first question, yes, it is possible that they could call him, but the plaintiff has, and I think correctly, put in writing to the judge that, hey, you know, this is something that should be very severely limited because there's very little evidence that Donald Trump could offer since liability is already established. Now, the defense team, Alina Habba, has argued in opposition that, well, no, not so fast. When it comes to punitive damages, what is relevant is the defendants, and these are the magic words, evil will, spite, hatred, things like that, will tend to build a punitive damages case. And those are damages that really aren't connected to the suffering of the plaintiff. They're connected to the punishment of the defendant and a warning to all other would-be defendants who might do the same thing. So we may see Donald Trump testify, although if I were betting, I would say the odds are unlikely, especially once Donald Trump hears all the rules. Or he might try another move like he did in New York State Civil Court, where he's told the rules are clear, and he defies them anyway because he's Trump.
I want to ask you about a couple more details here before we let you go. So in addition to Trump being disruptive in court yesterday, as we discussed, his lawyers also called on the Judge Kaplan, to recuse himself. Also motioned for a mistrial. This is after Carroll admitted to deleting threatening messages. Now, the judge had denied both of those requests, but what happened there?
A lot of that's performative. The judge is not going to declare a mistrial for something like that. I mean, it's possible, and maybe on appeal you have a shot and you're making a record. You know, for defense attorneys and really for litigants always, the key is you really want to try and make a record, because even if this judge isn't on board with you, for example, a motion to recuse is basically saying, hey, judge, I don't think you're an appropriate judge. So those motions, number one, are rarely granted. But number two, you've got to have some real chutzpah to bring a motion to recuse, because you're going to, if that judge wasn't against you before, the judge is not going to be your fan for the rest of that trial. For Trump's defense team, they're not looking to make friends. They've made that clear. So they have no problem making a motion like that. And maybe on appeal it would have a shot. But really, in reality, it may have been more performative than anything else.
All right, Danny Cevallos, thank you very much.
President Biden hosted congressional leaders at the White House yesterday, hoping to broker a bipartisan immigration deal that would also provide critical military aid for Ukraine. It was the first face-to-face meeting between the president and Republican Speaker of the House Mike Johnson since Johnson won the gavel in October.
Republicans are stressing the need for significant changes to border policy in return. Both sides called the talks productive, but it comes as lawmakers are also facing an imminent Friday night deadline to pass a temporary spending bill in order to keep the government funded.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba and NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin join us now. Good morning to both of you. So, Monica, let's start with you. Are we any closer to a deal, getting a temporary funding bill approved to avoid the government shutdown?
It looks like it, Joe. Of course, these are things that actually have to take place in this critical time frame before we can say for sure. But the procedural steps that have to take place are already in motion, and there will be a critical vote today on the Senate floor to likely extend this to avoid a partial shutdown and really punt this into early March to deal with some of these other appropriation bills. So if that happens, of course, if it passes the Senate, then it has to go to the House in order to do that. But there was some cautious optimism that can happen. And that was something that, of course, is happening in the context of this major meeting yesterday. But the real focus of it is this national security supplemental that deals with aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, while also providing some border funding. And that is happening on a separate track. And we just don't really have an exact timeline of when that could pass. But the urgency and the point of this meeting from the White House perspective was to stress to these congressional leaders that if there isn't this action, then Ukraine really could lose its war against Russia here. And they gave a detailed assessment of how that could happen in the coming weeks if Congress fails to act.
Yeah, so Julie, walk us through where we're at. Where do things stand after this meeting? I mean, is there reason for optimism? I mentioned that we heard each side say that this was productive. What do we know about that?
Yeah, you heard Monica say the real crux of this meeting was to talk about that border and Ukraine deal. And totally, from Johnson's perspective, he stressed to President Biden that they do need meaningful policy changes at the border. And you heard him and Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell, all the congressional leaders as well come out and say that there was broad consensus not only to address the crisis at the border, but also to send that crucial military aid overseas to Ukraine. Take a listen to what we heard from Johnson and Schumer. We'll talk about it on the other side.
We must insist that the border be the top priority. I think we have some consensus around that table. Everyone understands the urgency of that, and we're going to continue to press for it.
There's a large amount of agreement around the table that we must do Ukraine and we must do border. There was tremendous focus on Ukraine and an understanding that if we don't come to Ukraine's aid, that the consequences for America around the globe would be nothing short of devastating.
Remember, this package that the Senate leaders are talking about is one in which the trio of Senate negotiators have been hammering out, trying to come to consensus for weeks now. They're still hung up on some major issues concerning the area of parole and the president's authority there, but there is some progress as the leaders have signaled. Both McConnell and Schumer hope to move on that bill as soon as next week. They said, we'll see if they can get there, and then we'll see if Johnson in the House is going to put it on the floor without any changes that conservatives want.
So, Monica, you've got Republican lawmakers demanding substantive policy change. When it comes to the border, President Biden's repeatedly said he is willing to compromise on certain measures. What could that compromise look like?
And I'm told this is something he repeated yesterday in the room. He said and acknowledged that he believes the current immigration system is, in his words, broken and needs to be fixed. So this is something where he has said he would make significant compromise in the areas of how people seek asylum in this country and at the southern border. So that is a huge area where there could be shifts, and we just don't know exactly where, but we do expect there to be a change. And then also that question about how people, in terms of parole and future parolees, how that works currently and whether that could be changed in the future as well. That is a major open question. And then there have also been these larger conversations just about whether there needs to be more personnel, how this needs to operate, whether the time that people, while they're waiting for their asylum hearings, needs to be shortened, where they're going to wait for that. Are they going to be waiting in Mexico as opposed to in the United States, which of course the U.S. then needs to rely on the cooperation of Mexico. And today, a high-level Mexican delegation is actually coming to the U.S., to Washington, D.C., to meet with some key leaders in the cabinet to discuss that from a diplomatic aspect. And that is something that the president has said, look, I'm trying to do this on all fronts. He knows he needs to address it. He knows it's a major issue ahead of the 2024 election.
All right, Monica, Julie, thank you both. Appreciate you joining us this morning.
Yes, we do. Well, let's turn to the Middle East now. The U.S. has carried out its fourth round of strikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen. The Pentagon confirmed the operation last night, saying it targeted 14 missile sites that it says were loaded and could have been fired on U.S. Navy ships and cargo vessels in the Red Sea. Earlier, U.S. Central Command said a Houthi drone hit a U.S.-owned vessel, causing damage but no injuries. The strikes come as the U.S. has taken the step of relisting the Houthis as a terrorist organization. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said the U.S. would reevaluate that designation if they cease their attacks. The Houthis say the decision will not impact their operations, which they say are in support of the Palestinians, and target Israeli ships or vessels headed toward Israel.
Staying with the war in Gaza, more than 100 hostages, including 6 Americans, are still being held hostage by Hamas. Among them is a father whose wife recently gave birth to a baby girl. NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez sat down with the child's grandfather.
Her name is Shahar, Hebrew for dawn. She was born 5 weeks ago with curious eyes and 2 big sisters who love her. But she's missing someone. Her father, Sagi Deckelhen, is one of 6 American hostages still held in Gaza. When Hamas overran kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th, Sagi secured his family in a safe room, then went out to confront the terrorists. It was the last time they saw him.
When he was taken captive, his wife Avital was 7 months pregnant.
Sagi missed his daughter's birth. He's never held his little girl and doesn't know his family survived the attack. Now his own father, Jonathan, stepping in until his son returns.
If you could speak to him, what would you tell him about his new daughter?
I would say that she is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And that his 4 girls, his wife and 3 daughters, are waiting for him to come home. His girls miss him terribly, and they have all kinds of questions that we cannot answer.
When they ask you, where's Dad, what do you tell them?
The 6-year-old is perfectly aware that some of her friends were murdered on October 7th. There's no point in trying to hide it 3 months later. And so she is aware that her dad is in Gaza.
Hostages released in late November told Sagi's family they saw him in Hamas's tunnels, proof he was alive as recently as Thanksgiving.
We received that news overjoyed, but ever since that day, of course, worry only increases.
Jonathan's mission has taken him to a White House meeting with President Biden, but back in Israel, frustration growing with the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu.
All of the other hostage families are doing what we must to keep the Israeli decision makers aware of their obligation to bring the hostages home alive.
Tonight, a small glimmer of hope, a deal to get medicine to the hostages after more than 100 days. In exchange, Israel allowing more medical aid for Palestinian civilians in Gaza, where the healthcare system has all but collapsed. At least a third of the hostages have chronic conditions, families say, and they're demanding proof the medication reached their loved ones.
We must get clear proof that each and every hostage got the needed medications.
For Sagi's family and so many others, fear of more milestones missed.
He's already missed his daughter's birth. Do you worry what else he's going to miss as his captivity continues?
Part of me, yes, but I can't think in those terms because that would bring on hopelessness, and he doesn't deserve our hopelessness. So I'm driven by the desire to make sure that they all come home tomorrow and they won't have to miss anything else.
Our thanks to Raf for that report. Here in America, families of U.S. and Israeli hostages are expected to meet with the National Security Advisor at the White House today, hoping to keep the spotlight on their plight.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.